right, Doug, you have the floor.
Well, welcome to the Dan and Doug Show, everybody. This is season 2, episode 3. We're last time we talked about binding, and we figured it would be a good continuation to continue talking about binding. And we affectionately referred to the episode as liquid binding, just because I'm going to be introducing a repair that I've been doing for a couple of decades. And we're going to be getting into that, but we're also just talking about binding in general. And as I do at the beginning of every one of these episodes, I stress that there's no right way to do anything. That this is an experiment we've all been engaged in for most of our careers in trying to figure out how to deal with these instruments as they, in the case of today's episode, crumble apart before our very eyes. So it dawns on me in relationship to this topic, as well as a bunch of other topics, and this could have very well have been a Ding Kings as much as it is during the D&D show, but I figure we would do it here. Very often we are called to be more than guitar repair people. We're called to be like artists in camouflage, where we're trying to hide as much as we are trying to repair. It's one thing to be able to replace something. It's another thing to be able to hide it and make it look good once it is. That that is as demonstrative as it is when we're watching Ian paint grain lines, or they're watching somebody fake their way through some binding. But let me start by welcoming Dan. How are you, Dan?
Very good, Doug. Thank you. It's good to be here.
So
Season 2.
Yeah, season 2, episode 3.
I'm really sort of here today to ask questions when nobody else does.
There you go. But we are going to start. We're going to start. Dan sent me a little video that we're going to show. But before we do that, and this is a well, I have to actually see if I can find the video. How do I do this?
I'll ask Joan.
Here we go. So if I do that, and then I hit pause, I think I can come back to Zoom and I can share screen, right? So one of the difficulties in dealing with binding that's missing or needs to be replaced is getting it to look right. Now, there's obviously, everybody's heard the term binding slurry, and I have a video here of Dan doing that. And the one area that I think this actually works in, which is with darker binding. How do I? Oh, share screen. There we go. Is that up there? Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. And I think I've got audio. So I'm just going to hit play, and then we can discuss what the details are. But we're just going to watch this video that Dan sent us.
It's not long.
How come I don't have audio? Hang on. What did I do wrong?
Go back and do share screen, and then make sure that you've ticked the box that says also include the audio.
Share screen.
Looks like the little speaker
share
with the
sound.
X is on there too.
Share sound, right? Okay. Why am I missing this now? What's wrong? Do I not have something to? Oh, there we go. There's still an X there. Okay. I hope I'm better at fixing binding than I am at showing videos.
I just see your folder.
Oh, let me try this then. Stop share. Go back over here.
Let me see if Dan sent it to me.
Why I can't, I don't understand why oh, there we go. Let me try it one more time.
If you can, I've got it up on the YouTube. We can do it from YouTube.
Here we are.
Knotty Pine Telebodies, and I bought one to make a Gretsch Roundup-inspired country Telecaster. It's double-bound in tortoise with herringbone on the top, an old-growth mahogany neck with the bird's eye maple skunk stripe, but as it turned out, there was a tapered gap on the base side between the neck and the pocket wall. Now, 6 years later, I've returned to the project, and the first thing I did was repair that gap. I fit and glued a tapered pine strip along the wall, capped with a piece of tortoise, and when it dried, there was an air bubble gap that looked bad. I chipped and pried out the dried glue and some of the melted binding until it was clean. Then I used the tremendous StewMac binding trimmer to trim shavings from some tortoise binding. Dumped the shavings into a cup and added a couple squirts of acetone. Mixed them up real good. It doesn't take long. It's within 10 minutes I had a slurry. Then I'm smushing it down into that cleaned hole, packing it in good. That's Teflon, just to smooth it and squash it, and it won't stick. After a day's drying, I was able to sand it smooth. Little 400, and it's probably ready for some final sanding. That's how it fits now, and I'm pretty happy with that. By the way, this guitar also gets the Joe Glazer bender. In another episode, I'll show you how this installs and how it works. Thanks for watching. There you have it.
So I think that's one of the circumstances, the few that I've ever done, and maybe it's just me, but the few times that I've ever been able to make a binding slurry, if I can say that, and actually have it look good was in the circumstance where you had it, where you're dealing with like a tortoise binding, it's dark, and you can rely on the fact that it's going to kind of disappear into there. Every time I've tried to do what you just did with a light binding, I always wound up with results that were anxiety causing for me, because I could never get that to look right. And in that circumstance, I think it's the most appropriate repair because it's dark and you can get away with it. Am I wrong?
No, you're right.
Okay. So,
Doug, can you clarify that for a second? Like, were you having a problem with like ivory bind? I mean, well, of course, with ivory binding, your grain lines aren't going to line up for anything. But were you having a problem with just it getting dirty, or before you could get it onto the?
well, for a couple of reasons. One, whenever I've when we all kind of approach a lot of these repairs based on what we've heard, what somebody said they tried, and so forth and so such, and of course, and trial and error. And every time I've ever tried binding slurry on something that wasn't black, because black was always easy, or like a dark tortoise binding, it always looked like I filled a gap. I could always see the difference in color between what I had and the binding was there. I could always see a difference in the translucency between the binding that I had and the binding that was already there, that I was filling around. I could always see the seams. We all get that gap at the end of a fingerboard. I have one over here. I bring this all the way over there. And it's hard to tell because there isn't a nut in here, and I'll be doing it on this, but we have here we have the typical Gibson shrunken binding at the end of the fingerboard. You put a nut in there and it's going to look like it's missing a tooth right at the end of the binding, or right at the end of the neck before the nut. And trying to segment in a piece of binding, in my estimation, always looks terrible. And I remember having a conversation with Dan once where he said, I don't even bother doing that anymore. I'll just replace the whole, the neck, the entire binding on the side of the neck. And I think he was,
No, I wouldn't do that.
well, no, I'm not talking about just for the end of the section. I'm talking about when you had, like a section of binding missing on the end of the finger, on the side of the fingerboard. You said to me once something to the effect of, it might be easier just to replace the binding on the whole neck to make it look good.
That could be true, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it was one of those things where whenever I tried to mix a binding slurry to fill a gap, I never had any good results with it. It could have been doing something I was doing that was wrong, but there was always a problem with the translucency. Every time I tried to mix, either ABS or celluloid binding into acetone and then just make a paste out of it, I always had high hopes, and then as you start packing it in there, you let it dry and you sand it flush. If it's white or if it's light colored or if it's like the kind of yellowish kind of ABS, the color was always different, and I always wound up having to either explain away how it wasn't as good looking as it could be, or just deal with the fact that, well, we're not replacing binding, we're doing the best we can, and touch up over it and that kind of thing. And then I had a situation. This is about 20 years ago. I had a customer bring in, well, I guess if I remember correctly, it was a Gretsch with the typical Gretsch rotting binding, and I had just finished doing a rebind on an Epiphone archtop, like a Zither or whatever the hell it was, I forget. But for like a 30s Gretsch, and it was such a miserable experience, as a rebind very often does. And I had this customer who brought in a Gretsch that the binding was beginning to not crumble off, but you could see it fracturing and fraying and that binding rot beginning. And among other things, it needed frets, it needed whatever else it needed. And of course, he asked me if there was something we could do about it. I just finished this Epiphone at the time, and I was so in a headspace where I was really not interested in dealing with another rebind. It was just like one of those things where, like, I'm not going to be able to charge this guy enough to rebind his Gretsch. It was just, I'd had it up to here with rebinds at the time. And I'm not saying you don't ever rebind a guitar. I've got probably 4 or 5 of them in the shop right now. But so in the conversation with him, I said, I've tried attempts. I've had limited success with trying to keep it from crumbling. And we talked about, why it happens and why cellulose shrinks and all of that stuff. And I don't know if there's a consensus as to why it does. There's lots of opinions out there regarding it. And I'm not going to opine on that. But I remember saying to him at the time that, I've had very limited but questionable success trying to seal over, crumbling binding or fractured binding that looks like it was going to crumble away, with lacquer or, trying to put something over it. And I said I had been curious and, had some marginal success on very small pieces by using a cyanoacrylic glue or super glue. And with that, his eyes lit up and he says, well, cyanoacrylate would probably work really well. And he starts going on chapter and verse about all of the wonderful qualities of super glue and the chemical makeup of it and all of this stuff. And I just was standing there bewildered, and I finally had to stop him from talking. And I said, what do you do for a living? He says, oh, I'm a chemical engineer with DuPont. So I said, oh, that's an interesting conversation to have. And we talked for probably the better part of 45 minutes about using something like a cyanoacrylate to try to at least fortify the binding where it was starting to rot away. And I told him about my limited success with it, but it was very limited, and I was wary of it because I didn't know how permanent it would be. I didn't know how long it would last. I didn't know how to deal with the color. And of course, if I had missing binding, I wouldn't necessarily be able to. And then he refuted that right away. He responded with giving me all sorts of information about stuff I can put in it. And that's one of the key facts that I would like to have as a takeaway from today is that the process by which we approach our craft has got to be met with an open-mindedness to be able to try things that we don't know how they're going to work out. And so the guy said to me, he says, look, because I think cyano will work just fine if you mess with it and you figure out what it'll take and what it won't. And he gave me a bunch of information about what I could put in there. And at the time, I think, we're probably talking about the early 2000s. At the time, superglue was something that was becoming ubiquitous in our repair, our field as repair people, for at least probably 15 or 20 years at that point. There was a lot of it being used for filling small chips and clear coat and doing some minor repairs with it. Gluing bindings, of course, when they came off, and Dan, of course, was kind of at the forefront of all of that when it was first being discovered as a glue that would be good for the repair world. So he made me a bet. He says, "Look," he says, "I think you can do this." He says, "I'd rather not replace the binding on this guitar because I want to try to keep it as original as possible," which is a debatable point as to whether or not it should be, because I've always had the conversation with people that, well, if you have rotted binding, the only real choice you have is to replace it. Or if you have missing sections of binding, the only thing you can do is cut in fresh binding and deal with it looking as good as it can. So I started messing with it, and I was pretty amazed at the results I got. And since then, I had been doing it for 20 years and getting better at it. And anybody in this group who knows me knows I'm an open book when it comes to tricks, when it comes to techniques, when it comes to, sharing information. I'm a big believer in the fact that information is valueless unless it's passed on. But this is something that I've kept secret for 20 years, not because I didn't want somebody else to figure it out, not because I was keeping it for myself, but I've after a period of time, I've had so much success with it that I really felt like I was cheating, like I was getting away with something. And it wasn't until my association with the Luth Group and Ian, and seeing things like, the epoxy putty repair for hiding a hole in a guitar, and all of those kind of repairs being used, that I started feeling a little bit more comfortable about showing this kind of thing off. Because for years, I really did feel like I was getting away with something. And it to me, it was such a kind of a game changer for me. But I felt like, nobody believed that I'm really doing this. So that's the history behind how I came across doing it and what I started doing.
Watch your mouse.
Hi, George.
Got him muted. That's all right. George, go about your business.
So with that, I think I want to go over to the table and start showing some of some of the ingredients, so to speak, if you want to pin that
Yep.
over there. Any questions, Dan, so far?
How do you learn all this stuff? You're amazing.
Well, this guy was really my impetus, and he's still a customer today. The last time I saw him was I think it was about 2018 or 2019 when we first moved into this shop. He had brought in a repair, and he's been a customer of ours for quite a number of years. The last time he was here, we spent 45 minutes talking about humidipacs and the chemistry behind those, because he's a chemist. That's what he does. So that's how I just ask questions. I ask other people.
Sure. Doug, which camera do you want next?
We're going to go to the table. We're going to go to Sharon Proper's phone
Okay,
there.
let me see if I can figure out where it's at. Oh, there it is. Believe I can move these. All right.
And of course, if anybody has questions, they can just chime in. We're also going to, I'm going to go through the ingredients here. So I'm going to come over to the table. And we're going to go through the ingredients of what, and more importantly, the process by which I kind of zoned in on how this worked for me, keeping in mind that a lot of this was trial and error. A lot of this was the availability of materials. We're talking about 20 some odd years ago. Companies like Glue Boost didn't exist. Your choices for cyanoacrylate was limited. I tell you the truth, I didn't even know if Starbond was around back then. I know there was, they may have been, I can't remember, but I'm putting on my fingers on here. So the first thing I had to get past with cyanoacrylate is all of the
Fumes.
well, fumes is one of them, but also all of the mythology behind it. Now, it may work for other people, like I said, maybe I'm doing something wrong, but I'm almost convinced that the first person who said you mix cyanoacrylate with baking soda for nut slots was pulling a fast one on the Lutherie community, because I've never had that work well for me. I've always packed baking soda into something, and as soon as you hit it with super glue, it's like watching a magic show where you get this puff of smoke and the whole thing sets off the CA almost instantaneously. But some of it is, just trial and error of what works and what doesn't. You'll notice I always mix on glass because I'm a neat freak and I don't want to have to spend too much time cleaning up my bench. When I mix most of the stuff in cups. I also really like aluminum ointment tins for mixing things in, because it dulls down the color a little bit. Plus, there's some things that you don't necessarily want to mix in plastic because it'll melt. But generally speaking, you're starting with a CA. And I always mix my CA into a cup here or into an ointment tin, because I can see it really well. And back at that time, you had cyanoacrylate, you had you didn't have much else. You had accelerator. Most of the accelerators were terrible. And then you had, super glue remover, or what we now know is pretty much acetone, in order to remove it. And it was in the conversation with this customer of mine who is a chemical engineer that it first dawned on me. Because I asked him a question in that conversation. I said, what's the difference between CA and gel super glue, or like gel, the thicker stuff. And I said, what's in there? And he said, oh, that's easy. It's rubber. It's rubber. He says, yeah. The difference between, say, like a fast cap or cyano, this is Starbond Superfast Thin, or not fill and finish, but somewhere I have the glue boost. What does he call it? Master glues? Yeah, this one, the master glue. The difference between that and the gel super glues is rubber, and I think it was I don't know if it was JB Weld or some other super glue company that first came out with the one of the first gel super glues, the really thick stuff, the syrupy stuff. And he says they put rubber in that, and I don't know exactly what kind of rubber. Chemically, I'm not even interested enough to know exactly what. I'm mildly fascinated enough to sometimes look up what's in a super glue. A super glue is an ester, which is the polymerization happens with moisture. An ester is an acid base compound. The cyanophene, which is where we're starting from, was pretty much all that was there. And if you wanted it to look different, you had to add stuff to it. Problem is adding stuff to it, nothing mixes into super glue very well, as we've all experienced. If anybody has ever tried to put pigments in there, like the Blendall, not the Blendall pigments. What's the liquid stuff that is
Mixol?
Mixol? Yeah, Mixol. If anybody's ever tried to put Mixol into super glue, will have a rubbery mess on their hands. It doesn't mix in there very well. But what I found at the time was that I could mix iron oxide pigments, which is a powdered pigment, into super glue if I mixed it into something else first. Iron oxide, if we take one of these tins, I don't know if you can see inside that. Is that close enough? Or do I have to lift the camera up a little bit?
You're good.
That'll probably be okay. If you can get tighter, it's always better.
That better?
Yeah, tilt down just a little bit. There you go. That'll probably hunt.
Okay. So if I take some super glue and mix it into a tin, and these, by the way, these are the spatulas that come from Glue Boost. They're made of, I think, silicone or something. They're wonderful. If you take an iron oxide pigment and try to mix it into super glue, you'll see exactly what happens. It's the same experience all of us have, which is, well, that didn't work. It just kind of clumps up, it hangs out, it doesn't do anything, and you wind up with a trial and error and say, well, that didn't work, and you move on, and life is terrible. Can you bring me over the garbage can? So that didn't work. What I found, partially from him, was that if I mixed my pigment into something else first, it would begin to suspend in my liquid. since we're talking about binding, let's talk about and oh, by the way, the other things you can mix pigments into is nitrocellulose lacquer. That's a 1-to-1 with nitro and thinner. And I just took it out of a can that I spray out of. So I have a pre-mixed 1-to-1. This is also butyl. This is a solvent that we use in lacquer. I can mix pigments into any of these as well. If I take this butyl, put a few drops in a bottom of a cup, put my cap back on because this is going to get unruly in a little bit. And I just take any of my oxides, yellow oxide, for example. I generally try to use a different spatula for each color so I don't cross-contaminate my colors. But just for our purposes, I'm going to take this and I'm going to mix it into some butyl, and you can see how it goes into solution pretty well. Then once I have that, and this is a yellow iron oxide pigment, and it's a standard iron oxide pigment that would be used for artist paints. If I then took that, whether it's in butyl, I could do it in butyl, I could do it in acetone, I could do it in lacquer. If I then took that color and I dropped it into my cyanoacrylate, lo and behold, put that aside, I have yellow superglue. To me, mixing it into something else first, then putting it into my superglue was the way I was able to get color. Nowadays, we have these from Glue Boost, which actually work a whole lot better than iron oxides. And to tell you the truth, I don't know what the pigment is in this. He won't tell me. He's a little secretive about stuff like that. But I believe it's got to be some kind of iron oxide mixed with other materials so that it suspends itself into Ca. But that's the general idea behind mixing something into something else, so then I can get my super glue to accept it. I'm going to move this aside. So since we're talking about binding, let me get rid of this. And let me come back to another cup. We're going to go through a lot of materials today. Since we're talking about binding, we're generally not talking about clear. This, by the way, is, let me go through some more of the ingredients. This is a solvent called dioxane, dioxane. This is acetone. They're distant cousins from one another. They're both solvents, they're both organic materials, organic compounds, and they both function in the same way that they're a solvent. They work very differently from each other. Acetone is corrosive to superglue, dioxane is not. I have used acetone in some circumstances when I'm dealing with this binding technique because it bites harder into some materials and some binding type materials like ABS. Most of the time I'm using dioxane. Dioxane is one of the solvents that's actually used to make celluloid when we're talking about celluloid binding. So it's a great base to mix into to be able to put into our super glue, and then of course have it affect our binding when we're repairing our binding. Let me put the cap on this just for a second.
Doug, out of curiosity, what's the toxicity like on that other stuff? Is it comparable to acetone?
Yes, pretty much so. I mean, I
Okay.
wouldn't drink it, you know.
Okay.
The fumes, you know, work in a well ventilated area. I try to keep it off my fingers by using my finger cut type stuff.
But it's not crazy. It's not like
No, this is not hazmat stuff. This
okay,
is, you know, this is like
cool.
acetone. You know, they use acetone to take nail polish off your fingers.
Where do you get that at? Is that any
Uh,
chemical supply house or
you can. I like. There's a company that I've used a lot called Lab Alley
uh-huh.
online. It's just a chemical warehouse place, mostly for scientific purposes. This is from Lab Alley. I bought this, I don't know how long ago, but I've only used that much of it. You know, it's only down to here, and it's years of use.
Hmm.
It's such a sparing thing that I use. I don't go through it like I do with acetone for cleanup purposes. But let's grab a little bit before I close the bottle. Now this, if I just put it in here and put a good amount of it in, that'll eat right through the bottom of the plastic jar. So that's why I like something metallic. I buy these ointment tins by the truckload because they're wonderful to mix colors in. They're a great little palette to carry around while you're doing your finish repairs. I'll use the shallow one. I, you know, they sell these at Glue Boost. They're whatever they are, HDPE. Um, I don't like mixing on them because I don't like having to worry about the material falling off. I did find, and I'm gonna have to look up where the
Doug, are your epoxy or the little cups, are those solvent rated or are those because I get solvent rated ones and I'm just wondering if and they'll definitely hold acetone, but I'm wondering if the chemistry of the other solvent is a little different.
this'll hold dioxane, just not for a really really long period of time. Plus the ones I bought are really thin. You
Mhm.
know, these are HDPE, which they work great. You know, so I would mix into those if I wasn't sure. Um, so I do have some of those as well. Most of my mixing is into here. If I put dioxane in here, and it'll hold it, but just not for a really long time. So I'll typically put a few drops in there, maybe only about 10 drops. If I'm doing that, I'll typically, just to make sure I don't have cleanup, put it in another cup, you know.
Scott is wondering, Patrick, this is being recorded. Do you premix master tints from Glue Boost and Dioxane as well? I've had problems getting it to mix well into CA alone. By the way, the Glue Boost white is definitely Rick had initially said or had always said that the white absolutely has to be mixed into acetone first in order to go in. A lot of people uh
That is correct. That is
um but I would say let's see here. I've also had problems with master tints getting hazy and even brownish after curing. Any tips for that?
Well, here's the
Um,
thing. Here's the thing with master tints, and this is why when I'm dealing with color, I've said it before. I'm an all of the above finisher, so I will use master tints an awful lot. Um, there are some aspects of them that are wonderfully virtuous. If I take, let's take a detour to talk about these master tints. Let me get my cap on my dioxane so I don't spill. Let's grab a fill and finish here. Let me fill a cup with fill and finish. Put a generous amount at the bottom. Um, Here, for example, is the red, the transparent red. Am I in frame? I can't tell. There we go.
you are, yep.
So I did a little bit of a session with Trevor Healy, because he had a guild in-house that he needed to do some color matching on. And I had mentioned to him, let's talk about the red, because this is a dead ringer for that red guild finish that's on, like, you know, the D25s and the D50s. So if I take, let me move that aside, that's my dioxane. If I take a cup, mix a little bit of fill and finish in there, I'm going to grab a fresh one of these, and that's it right there. That mixes in beautifully. Sometimes it takes, with some of the colors, depending on how old it is, sometimes it'll take a little while for the kernels to completely go into solution there. But that's a great, you know, mix. Now this is not a dye. This is a pigment. So this will always and forever be suspended. And then the longer it sits there, sometimes the suspension can separate. You can get darker for sure. You can mix different colors in. But if I take just a little bit more, mix that in. I don't know if you're seeing this. I can't tell if my hand's in the way. The whole trick here is to mix it in a little bit at a time. There are some kernels that are or some powder that's not going to mix in, and it depends on the color. I notice that happens with yellow a lot. With the yellow or the amber, I have to wait for a bit. Another thing I stock up on is, by the way, is I just get, you know, the Seafold towels, you know, from the, you know, the usual bathroom stuff, because it rips nice and easy, so I can clean off my palette. These you've got to clean off really well with the Glue Boost powders, because you can easily transfer color from one spatula into the next color. So if you're not really careful about getting all of that off of there, transferring color is easy to do. You can see that little bit at the tip there. Do you see that? I don't know if it's coming through on Zoom, but I got a little bit of color right on the tip that if I don't get that off of there, that's going to show up when I want to use a different color. I normally try to stick to one color per spatula. This here, maybe if I can grab it really quick.
Keith, those spatulas are not super duper porous. They're not as hard as like the HDPE though.
So,
Oh, there's your red guild.
yeah, there's your red guild. I wonder if, here we go. So, these are wonderful.
What's the bristle on that brush?
That to me is pretty much a dead ringer.
Yeah, it looks
from
really
the red
nice.
guild, you know. So these brushes, I think this is on the Luth Group's Amazon thing. These are the little they're
Microfoam.
they're not, they're like makeup brushes, I think. They're
Uh,
like miniature makeup brushes.
Is that a foam tip or a bristle tip?
I think it's bristle, or it could be. It's not foam. It's bristle.
Okay, cool.
I love them. I
How
have.
many swipes can you get out of that before you got to toss it?
Well, the great thing about it is, you know, after the super glue has gone off, let me hit this with a little accelerator so it is off. You know, the super glue, of course, will harden
Uh,
on any brush, which is why I don't use good brushes when I'm using super glue. But once this is hardened, I can just pull it right off, and now I've got something I can mix and drop fill with. So I
yeah.
get double duty out of every
Mhm.
one of these. But there are the colors in Glue Boost stuff is there's virtues to them, and there are pitfalls to them. Like I said, this red is wonderful. The open time is really good. I haven't had problems with it going off or getting cloudy. Other colors have different issues. I don't know if I'd be able to demonstrate it here. Glue Boost's blue is a problematic blue to me. And let me see if I can demonstrate this. So I don't use this a lot. For certain colors, it might work okay. So if I just pour some CA in the bottom of this, and I get some of my blue and mix it in, it looks okay. It looks blue.
If you put the caps on those little metal ointment containers, will the super glue won't harden?
If you put the caps on them, they'll stay open for longer. What makes super glue dry is moisture. Now here, let me see if I can get this to do it.
By the way, if that's a new blue, I think I think he changed the blue.
Do you think so?
This I don't know how old yours is, but is that remaining blue?
Nope. Here it goes. I don't know if you can see down in there. Do you see little specks of red showing up?
Oh, is red? I don't remember what the word is. What is it? Is it coming out of the pigment or?
I did mention this to him that I have a problem with this, especially after it hardens. If I try to clear coat over it, it turns purple.
Yeah.
And if you're dealing with it, trying to mix a light blue into something else, or you add clear to it to try to get it to a lighter hue,
Hmm.
it separates into red and blue.
Yeah. It's like almost the opposite problem that yellows have, where like when yellows go into concentration, they start getting a red component to them the more concentrated they get.
Yeah, and he's aware of it. I told him about it, and I'm not sure what's going to happen about it.
He did send me some new blue to try out. That's why
Okay.
and I forget if maybe I remember telling him like, yeah, it doesn't
Oh, here we
have,
go.
doesn't have a purple component to it. Okay.
You see
So
the
that's
two
like,
colors?
so that's ready for making Easter eggs then.
Yeah, that's one of the things with master tints is it depends on what's in the particular color. This you can see the purple hues down in there.
Yeah.
Um,
There you go.
so that one there is something that if I were using on a blue finish, I couldn't get away with it.
Precipitated. That's the word I was looking for.
Right. So here,
Uh,
for example, I would have to switch to a blue iron oxide
yeah.
if I wanted to achieve that. So
Patrick,
that's where going back to what I was saying before, this is all a trial and error and an experiment with different materials in order to achieve different results. And I've said it time and time again as part of the Luth group that I'm not getting paid to make a crack disappear. I'm getting paid for all of the time I've spent in my finishing room trying different materials,
Mhm.
testing different processes, and that kind of thing. Let me swap out my fingers here.
Patrick, I'd
So,
say it's coming out a solution, but it's one of those things. It's like red and blue are primaries, and like if I'm going for, one of the things about mixing them from my perspective is I want as primary a primary as possible because I don't want any of that
right.
I don't need, especially with red. Red is, talk about, like I'll call it red ambush from time to time, but you're working on something, and then all of a sudden it's like, where did all that red come from? And a lot of times it's because a lot of these colors have extra red in them.
Extra colors in them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And it's not just Glubus. This is a colorant. This is across the colorant
yes, you're
replacement
right.
spectrum.
You're absolutely right. How they make iron oxide pigments into different colors is obviously by mixing other colors together.
Mhm.
You have some primaries from certain types of things. For example, green is not iron oxide, green is chrome oxide.
Mhm.
And that's where that comes from. Iron oxide pigments come from exactly where it sounds like they do, iron. Now, since we're going back to talking about binding, and like I said, I am a huge fan of the Master Tint pigments. Um, mostly yellow. What he's calling amber here, which is more of an orange. Browns work really well. Blues I'm not a fan of. The red is a killer red, especially for certain things. Like I said, with like that gild kind of purplishly red on the back of the gill that we just looked at, or in the back and sides of the gill that we looked at. And quite frankly, for my tastes, Master Tint goes into super glue better than anything I've ever tried because I can mix them right into the CA, with the exception, of course, of his white and his black. Of course, the white is very difficult to mix in straight into super glue, just as the white of anything is. And like I said, I don't know what his pigment is. He plays his cards pretty close to the vest. I'm expecting it's some kind of relative to the iron oxide type of thing. Since we're going back to talking about binding, and that's super glue that's in there. I think that's super glue. Yeah, that is CA. Somewhere I don't know where I put my dioxane cup. I may have poured that out already. Let me come back over to here. Here's my dioxane. It's evaporated a good portion of it. So since we're talking about binding, this is where my journey with binding repairs started. Titanium dioxide, which is white. It's a white pigment that artists use. And I'm going to switch to a full glove because
Holy moly.
this stuff, yeah, you haven't seen me wear full gloves quite
Oh
yet.
my God.
Only because the white powders have a tendency to get like everywhere,
Yeah.
you know. So there's titanium dioxide. And there is zinc oxide. Okay? On Zoom and in real life, they're very hard to tell apart, which is why they're also labeled on the side of the tin. Because I want to make sure that my titanium oxide cover goes back on my titanium container and vice versa. These are just artist pigments. They're not anything dramatic. If you look up titanium oxide on Amazon, you'll find decent, affordable pigments. So the reason why we have two and not just one to choose from is because of translucency. Titanium dioxide is opaque. It's also one of the chief ingredients in sunscreen. It blocks out the sun's rays to your skin. Zinc oxide is translucent and it allows light to pass. It's still a pigment, but it's not opaque. Let's put some dioxane in the bottom of our thing here, and I'm going to grab a little bit of titanium, and it mixes very nicely into solution. I'm going to grab my paper towel, grab a little bit more, and I can mix it pretty heavily into there.
So that's just titanium, or is there zinc in there as well?
There, right now, it's just titanium oxide.
Okay.
And you notice it's mixing in quite nicely. It's diluting itself pretty well. I may have put in a little bit too much dioxane.
Do you with I've never I guess Rick's like the Glue Boost stuff is probably more akin to like a powdered dye, whereas this is more akin to a powdered pigment. Like that's not dissolving into the super glue, right? It's suspending.
This is not super glue that we're mixing it into. This is
Oh.
suspended into dioxane.
Oh, okay.
Then I would take my CA. Let me make sure that my CA, pour some CA in there.
How you liking that ultra thin?
The ultra thin is wonderful. And then I can drop this into my super glue, and it mixes in wonderfully.
I guess what maybe I was alluding to is that is there when you're putting a particulate in there, is there a point at which you risk the super glue stop doing its super gluing? Like does it get less strength or anything like that as a result of
Well, it depends. I mean, obviously, if you go to the extreme, if you have 90% titanium dioxide and 10% CA, you're going to have a clumpy mess on your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for my purposes, when I'm mixing, and let me do it here.
Christopher Murray's asking if you have a specific ratio or measurement.
Well, yeah, this is what I typically do whenever I'm dealing with trying to mix my binding white. Because that's right now, there's a lot of pigment in here and not much glue. But I just wanted you to see how it goes into glue. When I'm dealing with, and maybe I can move over here, when I'm dealing with this, oops, that's obviously pretty badly.
Looks like your binding's falling off there.
It is. That's pretty bad in terms of our binding rot. You can see all in here how this is all crackled and missing sections. We can see a big void here, and of course all of this is gone. Same thing with over here. We've got a missing section here. We've got a missing section here. If I come and look, I don't know if I can get a good angle.
This brings up Scott St. Dennis wants to know where's your where do you draw the line at on here? Are you gonna you're doing this to like test or show us what you did with the Elvis one, right? Like, but
Exactly.
is this one that you're gonna rebind ultimately?
This one
Yeah.
is not going to be rebound.
Okay.
This is as bad as the Elvis one was. This section here is probably is about as big as one of the Elvis sections was missing. But, you know, this here, in here, we've got, you know, binding that's not surviving very well. It's all flaking just to the touch, you know. So if I get in here with my fingers and just touch it with my fingers, that's kind of all kind of coming off pretty easy. If I rub too hard over here, whoop, right there, we got some section that we just lost. I don't know if I can, there we go. That we just lost over here. We had some binding that we just had crumble away over here. So this is crumbling binding. This I would use the white stuff that we're mixing now to fill these voids. I would have no issue with this if we're going to talk about drawing lines or drawing boundaries. This, when this is ultimately done, I'm going to replace this whole section with liquid binding because it's just easier. Now I could graft in a piece and then try to hide the seam over here and try to hide the seam over here, but we're going to see in a minute how shapeable this stuff is. I'm probably using the wrong camera for over here, but I just wanted to be able to show you. If I come over here, and is it too washed out for,
This is always going to be hard on, you know, like other than maybe changing the light in the room, which I don't think is worth getting into.
is that showing up okay? Can you see the crackling in the binding?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a crack there. We can kind of see it.
Yeah, this now here, I would choose to do with both clear and white, because I would use like a glue looper and get the white suspension to go into the cracks, you know, let it harden, because it hardens immediately. You hit it with some accelerator. Then I would brush over it with our clear solution of what we're mixing over there right now. So this is kind of a twofold, you know, or kind of a twofer kind of technique, where in a situation like this, I can stabilize this by using dioxane along with my CA, and if I'm going to use any pigments, but also with clear, and I also use lacquer in the mixture. I'm going to show you how much how I do the ratio for that in a second. But this here, I would just brush on and let it sink into all the nooks and crannies. The dioxane will soften the, in this case, the cellulose binding, allowing the CA to polymerize onto the binding itself and hardening the binding. So just to give you anecdote, and I was trying to stress before, let me come back over here. And maybe before we go on, I have we'll look at a quick video of probably something most people have seen. But I don't have anything other than anecdotal, quote unquote, empirical evidence that this is a long-term solution for binding, other than I've seen guitars recently, in recent years, that I've done this to 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it looks like it did 20 years ago. Meaning it's
Yeah.
like it hasn't gotten any worse. This is not a solution to re-amalgamate binding. This is just to stop it where it is.
Mm-hmm.
The CA, and this is what I was talking about with this chemist customer of mine, he got so excited because he was aware of the fact that cyanoacrylate, it is a biodegradable polymer, not unlike shellac, almost in a sense, because they're both acid chain type materials. But he was excited about it because he came to the realization that this would act as a sealer from anything that would naturally be happening to the binding, if in fact you're of the opinion that celluloid rots because the plastic begins to break down as it's in contact with the air.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're sealing it with something like artificial, like CA, you're kind of stopping it where it is.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the proof in the pudding, like for example, is the guitar we were just looking at over here. I was, at the section of the binding where I just touched and it flaked off in pieces, and some of it's on the floor now. When the guy brought in the guitar that was Elvis's guitar, it was in storage for the better part of 15 years in an unclimate controlled storage locker. And the binding had began to rot. And so much so that, and when he brought it in, it looked like the crackling binding we looked at that was stationary. It wasn't missing.
Mm-hmm.
But as I was talking to him about the guitar, I put the guitar down on the front counter as we began talking about the guitar, and like 3 or 4 pieces of the binding, maybe about the size of your pinky nail, just kind of fell off and hit the table. And I started like collecting these pieces and putting them in a little jar, because I'm like, oh great, now I got to glue that back on. Now I got to glue that back on. Now I'm going to try to glue that back in place. Now I'm going to do that. And as I continued to touch the guitar, every place I touched the guitar, binding would come off about a ½ inch, ½ inch, 1.5 inches, somewhere in there. I'm going to come over to the laptop to see if I can share screen here. Is that working?
Mm-hmm. For what it's worth, I thought I'd maybe interject my understanding about the chemistry thing, and this is just from secondhand knowledge, is that the celluloid is off-gassing, and apparently as long like a good preventative measure is to keep your guitar outside of the case. There's some kind of like feedback loop when they're in cases, and that's where, because of I believe because of Gretsch's spotty record with playability, most of their guitars wound up living most of their lives in cases. But
I think so, and I think the problem with all of those things is that they're of our understanding because somebody said it, and we went, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's ever really nailed down the chemistry of what's going on with celluloid, other than celluloid is a natural material that's going to continue to break down as it ages.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the reason, being in the case isn't the reason why Martin pickguards shrink. Martin pickguards shrink because they're made of celluloid.
Mm-hmm.
D'Angelico, that binding rots, not because, as some people have opined, oh, they were in the Northeast around the tri-state area around the same time that they were in the tri-state area with Guild or Gretsch, and they must have been getting their binding from the same place. Well, I don't know. I don't know if in the 1930s and 40s whether, the binding for D'Angelico guitars was coming from the same place that there was for Gretsch.
Delmar Plastics.
But all of that said, I don't, I think a lot of that in our business has a tendency to do more with wives' tales than it does,
I think that's right.
you know.
The only, like, I mean, there's seriously something different about the chemistry of that binding though, because Martin guards do shrink, but they don't disintegrate. And
They don't disintegrate like that, true.
but some, DA pick guards definitely disintegrate. Sometimes the inside of it, the tortoise disintegrates and the binding
Yeah.
is left intact.
Same thing with Gibson pick guards, on archtop pick guards and stuff like that. So I think it is a function of cellulose. And I just, like I said, this was to me was an alternative for being able to come up with a way for
Oh yeah.
getting a result. If I
The other thing too is I think, that the cellul, that the binding isn't forever. I mean, nothing's forever. And if you get this on down the road, at least until after we're all dead, then I think it's a win.
it's possibly true. So this here, can we see that?
Yep.
This is the non-Instagram version of it. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but it is still sped up so we can see what happens with it. There's no stupid music behind it. There's, it's just showing, and I think most people here have probably seen this. This is our binding solution.
Are you accelerating this, or are we able to, is that
you can
time lapsed out of it?
I think you can see right there, as a matter of fact, if you watch closely, that I am accelerating it as I'm putting it on. I think there you can see a little spritz of something. There we go.
There you go.
So, I am accelerating it as I'm putting it on. So the virtue of this method is that, and the virtue of CA is that it's still CA with no matter what you mix into it. I can mix it with dioxane, I can mix it with lacquer, and I can mix it with butyl, which is all present in this particular mixture. And superglue still does what superglue does, which is harden in the presence of moisture. So you kick it with an accelerator and it hardens. Here I'm doing a faux purfling line because I wasn't going to try to rebuild layers of superglue black, white, black.
Mm-hmm.
Now that, by the way, yep, go ahead.
How is that going to affect the tone?
Here, by the way, I'm using a dental tool to score a deep, deep line that I can draw at the bottom of, and then I cover it with clear over the top of it, so it looks like it's got some depth to it. There, I'm just adding color on top. Same thing here. I think everybody's probably seen these already on Instagram. If they're here, they're probably showing up from that. That's the end result. And you would be hard pressed to find where the super glue starts and where the binding, or where the super glue ends and where the binding starts. That's that one. This is a 1950s Gibson, which somebody had teetered the fingerboard on, and as a result, there was huge sections of the binding missing like that. Same deal here. I'm just building up my color. Now this was not white, it was off-white, and I wanted to put color on it as if it was the yellowed lacquer, but the binding beneath it was not white. It was off-white. It was kind of a yellowish colored binding, and it was cellulose. And so in this case, you notice, by the way, if we go back to the beginning as compared to the Elvis guitar, when I put this on at the opening bids, what do you see there? It's translucent.
Mm-hmm.
I can see through it. That was on purpose in this case. On the Elvis guitar, I wanted it opaque because the binding was opaque. This binding had a luster to it that if I just did it as an opaque binding, it would have looked like a false tooth right in the middle of the neck. So here we're building. I'm hitting with accelerator in between. And the benefit of it is as soon as it hardens, I can begin shaping and scraping and getting my shape to the binding, matching what's surrounding it. Here I did have a little bit of a seam that I should have cleaned off, which I didn't. And since it's translucent, it's showing that seam. So I'm going to come in and fix it with a little bit of color. Now I start adding my color to tint the whole thing.
Thanks to spending way too much time with Blender, the thing that you're talking about with the translucent binding is subsurface scattering.
Okay. But there's the end result of that.
Very nice.
Beautiful.
Then we have the standard Martin gap, which is a different color binding.
Different material too, right?
And a different material. This is ABS. Now, what's not...
So are you using an opaque slurry on this, or
I'm using an opaque. However, I also is an example of me being hasty again in just doing a repair. I didn't clean the surrounding binding as good as I should have. I also didn't clean it out. So there's still a lot of junk in there. But you can see a hard line there where the binding ends and my paste, for the lack of a better word, sits. So what I did here, and the reason why I'm using chisels instead of files to scrape, is what's not present there, and I'll just let it run before we come back and I'll just draw you a real picture. Now you can't see the seam at all because it's an opaque binding solution that I'm using. And here I didn't get too particular about the perforating lines because I knew the neck was going to cover it in any way, and the heel cap was going to cover that anyway.
what was the eraser on there for?
Just I'm doing a little bit of strip sanding just to level it all out.
Uh-huh.
That's another trick I learned from Dan. And that's the end result there.
Very nice.
Completely undetectable. Now, what was missing from that video because of the angle, and let me stop sharing here. And let me go over here quickly and let me draw a picture. What was missing there was, and this is why the chisels were in place, was that if here was the binding that I was filling, and here was the material that was in between the gap, I didn't want a hard line here to be a telltale sign. So what I did was I came back and I cut a scoop like that into the binding with the chisel and just cut it out, and then I could lay my binding solution here and it hid the gap from the top of the binding. And I was able to move the seam out farther away from each other, so it wasn't something that was going to draw your eye right to the center there. I probably could have gotten it to disappear, but I was more interested in getting the job done. Now, just as an aside, another reason why I really like this technique is when you look at that piece of missing binding that was on the Elvis guitar, that job for just that section was for the total start to finish of that video was 42 minutes. And then it was sped up to be less than a minute for Instagram. The Martin binding repair was a total of, I think 13 minutes. And then the job was done. The Gibson guitar, I think, was a 35-minute repair, and I was able to walk away and fret the guitar right after that. So that's also part of the virtues of this kind of thing. Let me clean this up. I left that in. So now let's look at our mixture. I'm going to look at both mixtures of doing clear and white. And we're going to demonstrate the white repair because that's the most, I think, demonstrative here. Because seeing the clear won't really translate, I think, via Zoom. So I'm going to start with that's the wrong cover.
Well, we're in a little dip. Hey, Gary Brower, I saw you wanted to record the thing. We'll go ahead and record this and I'll make it available. I'll hit you with the link.
Okay,
Thanks,
so
Ian.
Yeah,
If you
man.
can hear me.
Always. I got you covered.
so let's start with if I was mixing clear. Here I can just do in a cup. Because if I'm mixing a clear super glue for the purposes of solidifying binding, I can just start with CA. Now, fill and finish products are great. You got fill and finish blue, thin, and then the ultra thin. How thin you want to go is up to you. I really like the ultra thin. Like I said, the difference between, and I don't know the answer to the question as it relates to Rick's glues. I presume it's the same. The thicker the glue, the more rubber is added. That's just, from what we were talking about before, the difference between super thin glue and like gel is how much rubber is involved. The other thing about super glues, like we looked at master glue over here, the difference between a master glue and a fill and finish in the whole fill and finish series is that the fill and finish series has additives in there that will help it work well with lacquer. It's a butane, not a butyl, excuse me, a butyl material, which is, we're used to thinking about butyl as N-butyl, which is the stuff we would use in lacquer as a retarder. This is what's in here is a dibutyl phthalate, which is a cousin to what we would use typically, which is an N-butyl. And I do add N-butyl to my super glues quite often. And this goes back to what we were talking about before of not being afraid to play with what you're working with, to add stuff to it to get it to do what you want. So here we'll start with just a fill and finish, and I will typically put a decent amount, and you will notice that I put a decent amount in a cup. I do wind up with especially when I'm doing these binding repairs, I do wind up with a fair amount of waste on my hands, especially when I'm mixing colors. So I will typically put in, and I'll use the graduated lines on the side of my cup. I will typically put in either 5 or 10 ml in there. Right now that's, it's about 5 right there. And then I will mix in dioxane. And I'm going to put in probably about 10 to 15 drops, which would probably be about 10% of that. Then I'm going to add butyl. Probably about 20 drops or so. And that'll probably give me about 20% total between butyl and dioxane. I've got about a mixture of probably 15 to 20% roughly, because now, if I look at my graduated line, I'm almost up to 10. Well, actually, yeah, I was at about 5. Now I'm at probably about, yeah, it's actually, I was about 5. Now I'm about 7.5. So I've got about 25% between the butyl and the dioxane, probably a little bit less. Then, whoop, I just lost my lacquer because I glued it to the bench. That was dumb. You're about to find out why I mix on glass. Can you help me here?
I'm sorry, I can't.
You can't enjoy this?
I can't help you, or I would.
Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of this. Get rid of this. I don't know why that happened. I guess I glued the cup right to the glass here.
Ah, happens.
Yep. But this is why I mix on glass, because I can just put it aside.
Robin has stated that he's glad he's not the only one knocking shit over all the time.
Yep.
Did you check your elbow to see if you've glued something to your elbow? That's what I like to do.
But that's why I mix on glass, so if something happens, I can get off and get right back to work.
But you just go to the glass glass shelf bin and take a new one. Right?
What'd you say, Dan?
You just go get a new piece of glass because you got about 100 of them there. You're always prepared.
How did you know?
I know because you buy 100 of everything.
Has
Frank
he
Ford.
mailed you one of those glass plates for sending him a sticker?
Oops.
Oh.
Don't let Doug see that.
What happened?
Nothing.
Oh no, my titanium.
By the way, this is a perfect time to tell you that the new DeWalt Dust Buster is a real win.
What I was trying to do, there was more super glue
It
on
doesn't
there
matter.
before you put the thing down. Yeah, I know
It
that.
didn't matter before.
That's a lot of stuff to keep on a small table.
Yeah, it's normally, I normally am doing it elsewhere. Well, so much for keeping my table clean.
Does anybody want to play some incidental music while we're doing this?
Okay,
All right.
so back to here. Where were we? Oh, here it is. I still have my mixture.
Oh,
So here's a little nitro.
Scott was wondering if you would mind sharing what you charged for that Gibson binding repair. Or was that was part of a larger repair, right?
Yeah, that guitar was not in for just for that. That guitar was in for a neck reset, bridge reglue, new pickguard, refret, inlay work, braces, nut saddle setup, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
So that was in for a variety of stuff. And
So what do you think?
So something like that, I probably actually just did the repair as part of the overall cost of the repair instead of trying to bill out that binding repair, because I priced the neck reset probably at about $3,000.
Uh-huh.
So I just included that in the neck reset.
What do you think rough time in that? Hour and some change, hour and a half?
On the binding job that we saw in the video for the Gibson,
Yeah.
that was 35 minutes.
35 minutes. And your
Yeah.
shop rate is 140 an hour?
140 an hour.
So 140 divided by 2 is
$70.
$70
Yeah.
plus
you could-
tax.
Yeah, and at that $70, you would be making a profit. If somebody came in with just that and they wanted me to do a repair to it, and I wasn't explicit about the fact that I could easily charge $250 for that and get away with it.
Yeah.
You know. So here I've mixed in another 20% of lacquer. So now I've got a total of say 10 ml of,
Max wants you to be careful at the edge of that glass.
thank you.
It's hanging off there we go. Good eye,
So
Max.
here I've got a mixture that I would use to stabilize my binding. I would just grab,
So just recap your anointment there.
so here it's mostly CA. It's about 10% dioxane, 10% butyl, 10% and another say 5% or so of lacquer on top of that. Because I started with about 5 ml of CA, then I added like about 10 drops of dioxane, about 10 drops of the butyl, which brought me to 7.5 ml. And then now, if I look at that, I'm right at about 10 ml. So I went from 5 to 7.5 and then added enough lacquer to be at 10 ml. And this, if I were dealing with, before I put it down, I think I'll just try to stick with the one camera here. So here, if I spin the guitar, and that's one of the virtues of having the workstation, is that I can let gravity do my work. So here, tell me if it's visible.
Boo, 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 boo.
Maybe not.
Uh,
Let me see if I can go straight down. Over there. Can you see the crackling lacquer here?
not
The crackling
really.
binding?
Oh, a little bit, yeah.
Okay, and that's the thing. It's very little. It's not missing. It's not a section that needs a whole lot of filler. I don't want to make it disappear. There's also over here. Maybe over here would be better. Where were we? Just up here. You're seeing in here? You see it here? Can you see that?
Just no, I cannot.
Okay, let me try another angle. This is the problem with doing it in clear. I wanted to do the bigger sections in white, which we're going to do. But this is just to demonstrate maybe quickly. Down in here. Right about here.
Here you go. Whoops.
Did I have it? Why is this not sitting straight? Hang on. There we go. So we're looking at about there. Can you see that or no? This cracked binding in here?
Yep.
Like right about there?
Mhm.
Yep. We're good.
There we go. Now that also shows a fairly good fissure that we might look at some of the white. Let me grab some white. This, by the way, I wonder if it's hard in the bottle yet. This is my liquid binding solution, which is mixed already. When
How's
I do
how's the shelf life of that once it's mixed up?
this has been here for the better part of a month, maybe 3 weeks.
Uh,
It's a little thick. And the trick is getting it in a bottle that's airtight. So we're going to mix some up, but I already had some mixed. This is what it looks like in the bottle.
yeah.
That's the same solution we had, clear, but with, in this case, this was zinc and titanium added because I don't want it to be completely translucent. So here, I would just take, if we're doing this section here, I would just take this, dip my brush in it, pick some up, see if I can do this through the camera or outside of it. Here we go. And I just brush it on. And it's still water thin and it penetrates into the binding. And I'm not too worried about how thick I put it on. I'm not trying to get a uniform coat. I just wanted to get it to cover. And then I wanted to make sure that it kind of seeps into the pores a bit. Then I'm going to come in and hit it with some accelerator. Now, that binding, it's already hard to the touch. Before it was flaking, getting ready to flake and, you know, be released just by finger touch. And this was the whole thing with the Elvis guitars. I went around the entire instrument exactly as we just saw. It's got some accelerator on it. I usually wait a little bit because the accelerator, when it's freshly sprayed, will stay active for a fair amount of time. So I'll go away, walk away, do something else, but for our purposes here, I'm going to come back in with another brush and coat it. And I think you can see how it kind of seeps in there. Hit it with some accelerator, let it harden. Now I'm going to come in and I'm looking at primarily this section right here. I got a big gap there. I got a little gap here, a little gap here. I'm gonna
Can you square up the camera again really quick? Just
yeah.
oh yeah, there we go. Oh, where'd it go?
Is that good?
For some reason now it's worse. I don't know what it is, but it'll I think it'll settle down. I think it'll settle down. There we go. But down just a little bit. Down just a little bit. All right, right there.
There we go. Now we can see all those little fractures there.
Yep. Oh, that's
so here, this little fracture here, I'm going to use a glue looper. I'm going to use my white. I'm just going to run it in.
Can you modify if you wanted that to be less viscous? Because you could modify that with acetone, right? Like,
I'm not with acetone. You would do that with one of two ways. You would do it with more dioxane,
more dioxide.
or, and this was talking about with the different viscosity superglues. If I wanted a thicker viscosity, I would just grab the next grade up of fill and finish,
Mm-hmm.
the thicker or the blue label or something like that. If I have a super glue that I'm working with that is a little bit too syrupy for me and not thin enough, I'll mix it with a thin super glue to be able to, thin out my glue. That's a wonderful thing about CAs is I can take a gel super glue, mix it with a water fast thin super glue or the ultra thin, and thin out my thicker super glue a little bit with my ultra thin. So here, kick that off. I blow it off because I never like to rub lacquer after I've sprayed accelerator on it, because I don't want it to go on me. There we are. That's already hard to the touch. It's already cured.
By the way, anybody looking for any of these different whites? Kremer Pigments in New York has all kinds of good different powdery additives. Danny says that file only has two sides.
Yes. This is just a hobby file,
Yeah.
but now I can just shape that area there.
Have you ever used Bianco San Giovanni Fine before, Doug?
What?
I was just looking at Kremer Pigments, and their assortment of white powders is like, it just goes on and on and on.
So here we can see that I have a small area.
I'm gonna put Kremer Pigments in the chat.
Okay.
With their white zinc.
Is it a zinc white or is it a,
Yep, zinc oxide, lead free.
do they have titanium oxide as well?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So
that's, a kind of a quick repair for what I am going to do very quickly is get a little bit of fill and finish in a cup. I'm going to drop in. Oh, I don't have any more over here because
is it titanium dioxide?
Titanium dioxide, yes.
That's the stuff.
I found some on Amazon as well.
Chip, the Kremer Pigments is in the chat. They got all kinds of groovy stuff there. It's where all the art conservation people in New York shop.
So I noticed that as I was filing, I get a little area, really hard to see, but a little area here that's getting a little too white for me. So I'm just going to mix some, I just mixed some yellow.
So is that
Master
too white?
Tint.
Like you blew through the yellow lacquer a little bit and into some fresh binding, or
Yep.
Uh,
Which is fine, because what I'm going to do is come right back and just give it a little bit of a yellow hue. It's probably a little bit too much because I'm moving too quick. Then I can file. And I would probably move to strip sanding. This is in my way. Oops. I can also this camera's driving me batshit.
do you um
So
do you have one? Is that on a tripod?
yeah, it is.
Do you have one of the? You might do better clipping it onto the workstation if you have one of those clip-on phone holders.
I don't. I do, but it was that's where we started, and
We'll
it
live
was,
with it. It's gonna work.
yeah. So I did put a little bit too much yellow on there.
Just put yellow all the way around.
Well, I could, but I'd rather just come down a little bit. And the other thing I want to show you, where I pull back a little bit, is that
I'm
if
just
here's my white, and there's my yellow, I could take a little bit of yellow into my white. And I normally wind up mixing color into color.
Does Rick watch these videos?
I don't know, but here's yellow into my white. And I can also easily,
Well, you could use any of the Glue Boost colors into that too, right?
yeah, that was a Glue Boost Master Tint color into this. So I can easily grab
Yeah.
just the right color of the binding as well if I wanted to do the binding color touch up instead of the yellow on top of it. And that'll,
Yeah.
if I was filling voids with that, then I would have less scraping to do. But you can even see over here, there's no seam anymore to speak of wherever it was. I think it was right here.
But also like on that I find especially like on that Gretsch binding, that color is not consistent throughout the entire thing. So sometimes even if you miss on the color, if you sand it off but incompletely and then come back over it like a few times, it tends to replicate that kind of mottled look over
Yeah,
it.
and you can get all sorts of creative with that. So here, let's go back over here. This section here is what I'll put the camera on the other side, but we can see here Maybe if I put the camera over here, it'll be easy to see. There we go for now. Really? Oh, there we are. So this section here, where we have, you know, some binding missing and coming out and flaking away. Let's take a look at that section there. So if we're looking at filling that, I'll come back over here. This is CA with dioxane with lacquer and butyl. That's the same stuff colored. That's my color itself. So let me take this. I want to mix I like to mix into dioxane. You could mix this into butyl. In fact, let me show you that. Doesn't really matter what you mix it in. There's a little bit of dioxane. Here is, where's my butyl? That's clear lacquer. There's my butyl. I take some butyl, put that over here. Since my titanium is open, let me grab that. Grab some titanium, mix that into my dioxane there. I don't know if you see that going in. Here, this is into butyl. Same thing. Goes into solution pretty quickly. Same thing with zinc. The difference between zinc and titanium is opaque. Zinc is not completely translucent. It's not, you know, you can't see through it. But it doesn't matter which, in this case. Then I would take that and I would pour it right in. And it almost doesn't matter which. I could pour into my super glue. I mix that up. In this case, I might even want a little bit of a thicker mixture because I want to build with it more. So I might even mix that into a thicker super glue like Fill and Finish blue, which is going to be a much thicker super glue. But what you have, oh, good, Doug. What you have is white super glue. That is tintable. It's mixable with color.
Boy, Doug, you really solved Rick's problem with his white, I imagine.
Well, it's
How is it he didn't get to here?
I don't know. Well, the problem with this is that you have to mix a fresh batch when you want to use it, because that all of that extra stuff will add to the hardening factor of CA.
If you want to take a beat and just and clean up, you're more than welcome to do that.
Well, I'm going to move over here because the other thing. Now, here's the problem with this: is that mixing this has been a pain in the ass for
Yeah.
as long as I can remember.
Uh-huh.
It works, but it's a lot of doing stuff. It's a lot of
Yeah.
chemistry. It's a lot of,
Uh,
and of course, I'm trying to do this in front of the camera, so I keep knocking things over. So this is a good time to announce this.
oh, look at this.
This product is coming out today.
Wait a second. Did you knock that stuff over on purpose?
Yeah, I did. I didn't have to, but I did. Well, I'll say that I did. We'll just say that I did.
That's just good.
So
Has
that
this,
is your mixture coming out?
you forgot to, before you did it, you forgot to say, does this ever happen to you?
So this is this in a bottle.
Yeah.
The one ingredient that's missing from this is the dioxane. Everything else is in here. The reason why dioxane is in there is because it makes it somewhat, if we tried to mix that into the bottle and we did some testing with it, it would make it unstable in the bottle. So the shelf life on this would be corrupted by it.
Yeah.
So this you can add your own dioxane to, and that's another thing I wanted to mention about dioxane. Dioxane is great for doing celluloid binding like we have over here. If we were doing ABS binding, I would probably then opt for substituting the dioxane with acetone, because it'll bite even more. But you know that one of the reasons why I wanted to go through, and it's all my fault for not covering my bottles. But one of the reasons why I wanted to go through that is because the act of messing with your finish, or the act of messing with your mixture, is what produces different results. Whether it's you want it a little bit yellower, you want it a little bit less translucent. I would think nothing of taking my fill and finish white, which is the new product, and let me do that. I would think nothing of taking my fill and finish white, and I'm going to put about 5 ml right at the bottom of the cup.
You're going to have to buy bigger bottles.
Get a decent amount of it down there. Then, if I want it to bite into my and I mean, we could have started with just saying that you can buy this stuff, but up until this week, this didn't exist. I've been after Rick over at Glue Boost for about 4 or 5 months to get him to make this, and he finally
You got him
did.
to make a new product in 4 or 5 months? Holy
Yes.
moly.
Well, he actually called me about 30 days ago saying that we're going to go ahead with the fill and finish white. That's when I scheduled this thing.
Okay.
But here I'm going to put in about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, only about 10 drops of the dioxane because it's a fairly aggressive solvent.
So he does have a shelf stable black now too, right?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to mix that into there. And to show you an example of how I go about, I'm not afraid to modify a product. I don't like the idea of saying, oh, it's in the jar. I just take it out of the jar and put it on the guitar. It's not going to work in every situation. This, I'm presuming, has some kind of zinc oxide or something similar to it. You can see how that it has a little bit of a translucency to it. If you put light behind it, we can see the light behind it. So I'm assuming that he's got some kind of zinc pigment in there. I want it a little bit more, for the case of this guitar, I want to hide more. So I'm going to put
Some black.
nope. I'm going to put some titanium dioxide right in there.
So Rick's saving you all the trouble of mixing most of that stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And let me put in a little bit more white. Probably should have mixed the titanium into dioxane first, because it's going a little slow into this.
You have to shake that new white.
Yes, this you have to shake when you use it. There we go. Try covering things for a change of pace. And that's my result. So white is much less translucent. So I've got, then if I want to get, and here again, if I want, oh, here's some yellow over here. If I want to just take a little bit of yellow that I had mixed in there before, I'll always go to another cup that has my color in it and transfer it over. Grab a little bit of yellow from over here. And here, I don't know if it's coming through, but that's not white anymore. It's more of a cream color. So now, if I come over here, and I would spend probably more time color matching than I am now, but and testing, but this is just for demonstrable purposes. Here,
This is an exhibition, not a competition. Please no wagering.
I just start filling up my missing section of binding.
$70 right there. He just dipped in $70.
Cha-ching.
I'm going on a little thick. for a little bit too much.
Doug, have you ever been to one of the Mohawk furniture touch-up seminars?
No, I haven't.
They're really pricey, and it's always kind of precluded me from going, but maybe next time one comes around,
It might be
you
interesting.
and I go take a look at how they do that stuff.
Can I ask a question?
You can ask me anything you want.
Sorry if I missed it. So the addition of the dioxane, does that make it adhere to this type of binding? Is that what the
Yeah,
dioxane's doing?
dioxane. Yeah, I use the dioxane because it's not as aggressive a solvent as acetone,
Okay.
and acetone can do funky things to celluloid binding.
Also, yeah, it goos it up, and it's pretty much an overnight, even with Accelerator, it's an overnight cure after that, right?
Yeah,
So does the fill and finish white have butyl in it or no?
fill and finish white has butyl in it.
Okay.
So all you have to worry about is your dioxane.
Okay.
But all of the fill and finishes have butyl in them. They have it's not N-butyl like we would use in lacquer, and I do sometimes add N-butyl to my fill and finish if I want a little bit more of what it gives me, which is melting into lacquer. If I'm looking for a ding repair or a drop fill that I'm really looking to
I'll just close
melt
the door.
into old lacquer, I will do that with N-butyl.
Okay.
Dibutyl phthalate is the butyl that's in fill and finish. Here, I just moved over. I'm going to let that set up for a bit, but I'm just going to move over here, and this is why I added my titanium, because I got a piece of black there that I'm not looking to get rid of. I'm just looking to cover, and then later I can come in and do what you saw me do in the Elvis guitar, which is draw a line in to simulate that purfling, because like I said, the whole goal here is to hide what's going on here. It's doing a little bit of camouflage.
Will you end up taking your initial clear and going over the whole binding sometime?
I did on the Elvis guitar because all of those areas of flaking binding that was at risk of flaking from being touched too much, I wanted to make sure that
You're holding it down.
that it's not going to go anywhere on me. Did somebody have a question in the chat? Did I see?
Let me see. We have, can we post a good source for some of the chems mentioned? Yes, we can. I'll make sure that that's part of the links.
So what I might do here, as you can see, I'm just working my way out to try to fill all those little areas. I might come over here and fill in that gap there. I might come up here.
Jay wants to know why you added lacquer to your mixture, and if that's
That
I'm also
is,
gonna.
go ahead. You're also,
And I guess we don't know if that's in Rick's bottle.
it's not in Rick's bottle.
Yeah.
Lacquer is one of those things that I like to add because it adds, for the lack of a better description, a shine
Mhm.
to my super glue. I don't know that it's necessary.
Mhm.
It's just one of those things I started doing. I liked the result of what I was seeing, and I just kept doing it. So,
Mhm.
and like I said, it's in terms of the thing I like mostly about it in terms of my final solution, my final mixture, is the texture or the syrupiness I get from it. I don't have to go to it. It almost feels like it drop fills like lacquer, not super glue.
Aha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know how else to describe that. Um, but I notice a difference in the consistency of my, you
I
know.
also would like to know if it affects the curing time. Does it
No, that's a wonder that, and that's the amazing thing about doing this, where you're mixing shit into CA.
so just
Um,
all goes off?
well, the CA is the binding agent. The CA is the curing agent. So when this CA, and notice how we're doing it in layers. I'm hitting it with accelerator, and then I'm
Yeah.
building it up. I'm hitting it with accelerator. I'm building it up. You know, this is already hard. This is this here. I'm not finished filling, but if I wanted to level this off, I can begin shaping that. I've still got some building to do. Same thing here. I would have to tilt the guitar into a better position to be able to file there. But here I can file the edge here. But you also notice what's happening here is that I can now touch this here and here. This whole middle section here I'm a little wary of because I haven't treated that with anything yet. I wonder, what did I do with my clear?
Scott, he's when he's adding the lacquer, it's into the mixture. So on this one, he's not actually adding it. He's demonstrating the fill and finish mixture. But
This,
in his own custom mixture, he adds the lacquer to the mixture directly into it.
yes.
Are you gonna go around this whole guitar and do it, or is this just for our benefit and you'll rebind it or something?
I'm going to fix this whole guitar with this.
Just like
Because
Elvis.
Yeah, just like the Elvis one. Because in a case like this, I can't think of a worse hell than having to rip the binding off of this and rebind the whole thing. I would rather spend 10 hours doing this than 10 hours sizing binding to a new guitar that at the end result I have to worry about finish. I don't, if we're rebinding it and we're doing all of this shit in here, I'd rather just come in here and fill all of these voids with my binding material. This stuff here too. We got the typical crackling going on in here. I would just come in here with the clear and just paint it on here. Let it dry, let it harden. I can come back, sand, gloss it up. Like I said, we've been here doing these two sections for what, 10 minutes? And this is almost ready to be shaped and colored, you know? I can come in here, add more to fill out the areas that aren't proud, because I need to make it a little bit proud first. And then some accelerator. What was that question I saw past the screen?
What does this show up as under black light?
I could care less.
I don't know. It'd be interesting to find out. Probably not great if
Yeah,
you're
it would probably be noticeable. I'm not looking to you know, commit forgery. I'm just looking to effect a repair that's more in line with the customer's ability to pay, you know. Um, you know, like I said, I don't know what people are charging to rebind a Gretsch like this.
I get $1,500 a side.
That's not enough money as far as I'm concerned. That's not even close to enough money for the hell that you have to go through to rebind a Gretsch or anything like that, really. You know, I rebound the D'Angelico, and that was a job where I did rebind the whole thing. It was you know, it was a better candidate for rebinding. But I'll tell you a secret. If we promise to keep it between all of us,
Yeah.
Yeah,
half
we
of, half of that peg head, you know, the really hard part of the peg head
Mhm.
on a D'Angelico that goes in around the finial,
Yeah.
it's all liquid binding.
Hmm.
Because I was able to mix binding, wrap that whole thing in liquid binding, sand it flush, and you can't tell the difference between that and the binding that goes around the rest of the peg head. I did put new binding on the sides and the up by the nut, but the whole top that goes in around the finial is all liquid binding that I just, you know, I colored to match. So that's already hard. And I can just file it right to shape. I can come in if I wanted to, which I probably will. With a little scraper. You can hear how hard I'm going at that. It's as hard as can be. Is that starting to look like something?
Yes. Well, actually, it's starting to look like nothing. It's starting to look like what was once there.
So here, if I were doing this, like I'm going to do the rest of the guitar, I would go around the whole guitar filling voids like this first before repositioning it, because then I would reposition this so it's flat on its back so that I can sand this area here on the side and then draw my faux, purfling line.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm going to do that now because we would be here for another 45 minutes. Plus, I have the rest of the guitar to do. But for purposes of our discussion, I'm now going to take some clear orange fill and finish, orange label, in a cup. With a brush, I'm going to give it a quick pass over the top of it. I can hit it with the accelerator. And I have binding that's ready for color and a little bit of sanding.
Well, Rick is going to sell a lot of that stuff.
I think it's a really good solution to this kind of thing where you have a small section. Once, if I even go as far as if I grab my Mohawk pens and I'm just going to grab golden oak, maple. Who else am I going to grab? For this case, I'll just do those two for now. I grab my honey maple tone.
Honey Mapletone sounds like the lady that played organ at the church.
And if I just do this, let me go with the lighter one. I can even, I don't know if you can see this, but I even draw in.
I'll get you some of them.
Where am I? Am I centered there? I could even draw in some faux crackly lines. grab a little bit of the Pro, the Ultra Thin. Put my color down. Hit a little accelerator on my color. One of the things I like to do with fill and finish is let my fill and finish come up into a Q-tip. Then I can brush on right over my marker. I don't know if Zoom is causing that all to white out or not.
It's a little washed out, whatever. Ba, ba, ba.
The only thing I haven't done is drawn my purfling line over here, which I will do at some point.
User says, would you cut down into the binding for adding the fa purfling line or just draw on top? You
I
don't
would
wanna-
cut, I would definitely cut down into it.
Yeah.
What I do is I grab, as you saw in the Elvis video, I have a bunch of dental tools that have been altered to be, you know, a fine line to cut. And if I had the guitar positioned properly, I could show you how I would just drag it this way, you know, to create a channel
Mm-hmm.
like that. You know, face down, of course, I have the guitar face down. And then I would, you know, keep scoring it until I had a nice deep channel into that I could draw a line into. You know, if you want to take the time, we can do it now if you want to. But
You know, we should probably wrap up pretty soon. We've been on it.
but that
2.5.
is, in essence, that is liquid binding. You know,
Oh, it's Brent with Indie String Theory. Do we want to do anybody got any questions?
yeah, fire away. If anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Going once.
Well, that's what you get for explaining things so good, Doug. Nobody wants to ask you a question.
It's right there to see, really. That's pretty
Hold
awesome.
on. Keith says, hold on. Keith, you can unmute and just ask the question. Typing kind of stinks.
Thank you, Jesus. I'm not the fastest type. So is it dioxide to ABS or is it acetone for ABS?
ABS would be acetone. Dioxane would be for the cellular.
Okay.
Cellular. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
The cups you use, they're not the solo cups. What are the chemistry cups you use called?
Oh, these things?
They're like condiment cups, right?
These things?
Yeah, those aren't condiment cups. Yeah, those things.
Those are medicine cups, like you would get from like NyQuil.
Dosing cups, yeah.
Dosing cups. Yeah, I bought a box of 5,000 of them.
By the way, there are two variants of those. One of them they sell as epoxy mixing cups, and those will do it better under chemical load.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I mix into those. Something like that is kind of my go-to cup. But one time I accidentally ordered the medical ones and everything just ran everywhere. Like trying to carry gas in a styrofoam cup.
Yeah, if you put like acetone into one of those medicine cups, it'll burn through the bottom of it.
Yeah, no, I'll send you a link to the ones that I get. it's a really nice size, and they're also super thin and cheap enough that you can just like toss them when you're done.
Mm-hmm.
They have labels on the side for measuring.
They
Yes.
do, yeah.
Thank you.
Doug gave me the recipe for this a little earlier. I've been playing with it for a couple days. I've actually just been mixing it into an old thrift store shot glass, and it's been
Yeah, those are nice.
working really good.
Oh, okay.
So you just acetone and wipe it out, and you reuse it however much you want. But yeah, just
That's
a
true.
little shot glass.
Max Versa says thanks for the great information from Brazil. Max, we got a few guys from Brazil now. We're getting quite a Brazilian contingency.
All right. Nice
Yeah.
to meet you guys. Thanks for that.
Absolutely. Okay, I'll put my cup link in the chat here. Hold on a second. We'll do that.
Doug Florin here. I just have a small question.
Yeah.
What would you do if you wanted to remove those darker specks, those orange browny ones on a guitar? If you wanted to remove those,
That I would probably then recommend to the customer that he should replace the binding, because those dark spots are from burnt binding, and you have to sand in pretty deep in order to get rid of it. You probably can,
Yeah.
but the amount of time you would be brushing on the stabilizer, I mean, like the clear, and then sanding on top of that would probably erase all of the savings that something like this is in terms of a time saver. I think I think I saw somewhere earlier in the chat somebody, I could have read it wrong. I saw it go by pretty quickly. But I think somebody said something to the effect of it's a lot of work or something like that. I forget what I may have just misread it too. The whole idea behind this is that this is to avoid me having to replace the binding on a guitar that A, I'd rather not to, or B, the customer doesn't want the expense or has a particular reason not to. In the case of like the Elvis guitar, it was probably about probably a good 6 to 8 hours of nothing but doing this all the way around the binding of the entire guitar, because it was like everywhere. This guitar we see here, this all looks pretty bad here. It's here, it's all in here, and then it kind of stops here, and the rest of the guitar, all throughout the rest of the guitar is actually pretty good. It's got some areas like we saw over here where we've got some fracturing, but that's easily, I can stabilize that with the clear and put in a little bit of the white in between like we did on the other side over there. We did that over here. I could easily do that over here and work my way around the little spots. I may have, at the end of the day, I may have 5 hours in this guitar, maybe 7 hours in this guitar when it's all done. I don't know about you, but the last time I bound a whole guitar like that, it was a lot more than 5 hours, for me personally, So I normally reserve those jobs for the times I can charge 20 grand to.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
To do the binding. So it's the kind of thing where, and in the case of the Elvis guitar, they didn't want all of the brown spots to go away because they wanted the guitar to be as original as possible.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Can you hear me there?
Yeah.
Hey, it's Gary. It's Gary. I don't know if my video's up.
Hey, Gary.
How you doing? Thank you.
You can take the pin down, Ian. the Gretsch so we can see each other.
How? Oh, here, wait, I hit my video thing. Oh, I see. Hey, hi.
How are you?
Thank you. This is awesome. How opaque can you make it with titanium? Can you make it so a thin layer is opaque?
Can you? I didn't hear the last part.
Can you make it so a very thin layer is opaque and would cover underneath it, or would that be too much titanium in the mixture?
No, you can. The titanium is, you can make it as opaque as you want. And if I were trying to go for like an opaque bottom, but some translucency above that, I would just go with a different cup and I would mix titanium in one and then zinc in the other. So I could lay down titanium, and then as I'm building, I could go zinc on top of that and have a little bit of translucency on top of it.
Okay.
Or vice versa. If I wanted to have, just the outer layer be, opaque, and then the translucency be, underneath. It depends on how you want to do it.
Gotcha. I like that idea. I have one of those fancy reissue Gretches where the guy built it and put the dots at the 13th fret, the side dots.
Is it the red dots, or is it
With the red side dots at the 13th fret?
Okay.
So I was contemplating trying your mixture to hide them.
You should be able to get a really, really close match to fill those dots in the wrong places, so you virtually wouldn't see them.
Yeah, it's white binding with a pretty heavy tint on it. So I figure I'd just make it white and then tint it with finish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tint it on top. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, an odd kind of took me by surprise. All right, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Any other takers? Any questions out there?
All right.
Or is everybody over at?
Hey, Doug, one more question.
Yeah.
Is there anything, is it a crapshoot as far as what part of the binding starts rotting? Like
on a guitar?
Yeah. Because you were showing me some spots were great, others were not.
That's the thing. I don't know if there's all sorts of theories in the world as to why, why binding decays the way it does, and all sorts of opinions. Some of which that Ian had referred to before about it being in the case, and if it's gassing off in the case, then but you would think then that would be permeating the rest of the instrument.
Sure.
It's almost inexplicable with this guitar, for example, how some parts of the binding look like they're perfectly fine, and others look like others literally are falling apart.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a good enough answer out there to that question.
Maybe sweat, body fluids.
Well, I don't know, because it doesn't look like this is crumbling in areas where somebody's holding the guitar. You would think if that were the case, it would be under the arm, where the arm would have been laid on the guitar. But that area is pretty good, actually. So I don't know if there is an answer to that question.
Okay. One offbeat question. Is those snaps on the back of that guitar I saw?
Oh yeah, this is one of the Gretches that have
a snap-on control cover.
This stupid thing.
Okay.
That's not that stupid. That lets you into the back so you can get at the wires.
That's true. That's true.
That's the best thing Gretsch ever figured out.
That's true. But it's the little plastic plate that they screwed onto the back of the guitar that makes it difficult to get to.
Oh, okay.
And then that shrinks and the screws never fit in again.
Right.
Hey, Luke, how are you doing with the dioxane treatment? Have you started messing with that Gretsch yet?
Yeah, that's what's actually right here in the Total Vice.
Oh,
I've actually been playing with it the whole time you've been doing your thing.
Have you been brushing
you definitely
on?
Yeah, so it actually is going pretty well. I did have to this binding is pretty burnt.
Yeah.
Actually, guys, we should probably give the Luthalong back to the
okay.
to everybody else. Are you okay with that, Doug?
Yeah, it's fine.
We can finish up,
Oh, Whittle Six.
Yeah.
we can finish up chit chat on the Luth lawn.
Yeah, sure.
Everybody, can you unmute and give Doug a hearty round of thank yous and
Yeah.
Thanks, that was awesome.
Thanks,
Bravo,
Doug.
Doug.
Good job.
Thank you,
guys.
this was really, really good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug.
So I have been told that it's currently available on Glue Boost's website. If
Okay.
this is
Let's
something
just-
you want, if this is something you think you'll use, I would go pick up a bottle.
Don't crash the site.
Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you, Dan.
Good.
All right,
Bye,
take
guys.
care,
See you guys
Doug.
over, see you guys over on the Luth lawn.
All right.